On Tuesday, the 7th of January in 2025, a 34-year-old father named Christopher McKoy from Douglas County, Georgia, would send a haunting message to his family explaining how he would be unable to pick up his son from school after suffering a panic attack and crashing his car. However, this would be the final message he would ever send, as shortly after, he would mysteriously vanish without a trace. That night, a witness reported seeing Chris along Beaver Ruin Road in Gwinnett County, where he appeared disoriented with a swollen eye. But rather than calling the authorities, they instead gave him a black coat to keep him warm before he would wander off. At the time, he was wearing a maroon hoodie and carrying a yellow blanket, but when his family searched the area after receiving the tip, there was no sign of him. The case then remained stagnant for over a week until eventually his missing car, a white 2013 Ford Fiesta, was finally discovered abandoned near the Norcross Elementary School, with no further clues about where he could have gone. But as if the situation couldn't get any more disturbing, his family then revealed that somebody had tried to extort them for $10,000 after claiming to know his whereabouts, which would turn out to be a lie. So, despite the massive efforts of everybody involved, over 8 months later, Chris's disappearance remains an agonizing mystery, leaving his family distraught as they are only left to wonder what really happened to Chris McKoy, and who could be responsible for his sudden disappearance. Christopher McKoy, simply known as Chris to his loved ones, was born in 1990 and raised in the state of Georgia to his loving parents Jackie and Bernard McKoy. From a young age, it has been said that Chris showed a natural warmth and an easygoing nature that drew people to him. Friends often recalled his sense of humour, his loyalty, and his ability to brighten up even the hardest of days. His family in particular admired the way he carried himself, responsible, thoughtful, and always willing to lend a hand. As he grew older, Chris found himself pursuing a career in food and hospitality, working his way up in kitchens across the Atlanta area. Through dedication and skill, he eventually became the head chef at the popular Brick Store pub in Decatur, a beloved establishment where his colleagues and customers alike appreciated both his cooking and his character. For Chris, the kitchen was not only a job, but also a place where his creativity could shine. But beyond his work, the most important role in Chris's life was that of a parent, when he became the proud father to a baby boy at some point during the mid-2010s. Those closest to him say he lived for his son, remaining an ever-present and dependable figure in his child's life. He balanced long work hours with the responsibilities of parenthood, often sacrificing rest to ensure that he was there when his son needed him. To his family and friends, his devotion as a father stood as one of his defining qualities. But in addition to his work as a chef, Chris also drove for rideshare services like Uber and Lyft, taking on extra hours to provide for his household and to ensure he was giving his son the best life possible. And so, by January of 2025, Chris was now 34 years old, living in Douglas County and maintaining his steady routine of work, parenting, and family life, where he was known to stay in regular contact with his loved ones, always keeping them updated when necessary. However, that sense of stability and consistency would suddenly begin to unravel, when Chris would mysteriously disappear on that fateful day in January. On Tuesday, the 7th of January, the 34-year-old left his home in Douglas County with the intention of picking up his son from elementary school, as he did most days. However, on this particular occasion, there was something off about his mental state. It is unknown if Chris disclosed these feelings to any friends or family before he jumped in the car that day, but what we do know is that soon after arriving in the small town of Norcross, these strange feelings would suddenly erupt into a full-blown panic attack, with Chris very much still behind the wheel. It is believed that he tried to stay as calm as possible as he attempted to pull over, but despite his efforts to remain in control of the vehicle, a collision would eventually occur, with Chris being left fearing for his life. However, in a stroke of luck, the accident would not be fatal, as Chris would emerge from the car relatively unscathed, but still understandably shocked from the experience. So with a damaged vehicle and a struggling mental state, Chris made the decision to message his family to let them know that he had been in a car accident and would therefore be unable to pick up his son from school, asking them to fill in on this particular day, to which they obliged, but were extremely concerned to hear about the panic attack and the car crash. However, despite their strong concerns that Chris needed to go to the hospital, every attempt to get in touch with him would be met with silence, and as the hours continued to pass, with the day eventually turning to night, this concern would only grow more intense. But the situation would only escalate further, as by the next day, Chris had still failed to return home or respond to any of his messages, causing his family to panic. His car was nowhere to be found, his phone remained inactive, and his absence from work and parental duties was entirely out of character. So, realizing that this was far beyond anything ordinary, it was at this point that they made the incredibly difficult decision to file an official missing persons report with the local police. On Wednesday, the 8th of January, the Douglas County Sheriff's Office would receive a call from Chris's concerned family after they realized that their loved one could have been in a great deal of danger. They informed the police about how he had been involved in a car accident and that he had suffered a panic attack. So his sudden silence was more than just strange, it was a distressing red flag that his mental state may have been compromised. So, responding to their concerns, investigators opened a case and began piecing together his final known movements. One of the first steps was to retrace his last verified location at the time, which was supposedly in the town of Lilburn, Georgia, but despite their initial efforts, no trace of Chris was found in that area. Detectives then turned to those closest to him, interviewing family members, friends and co-workers, hoping to uncover whether Chris had mentioned any plans, or if there were any hidden struggles that might explain his disappearance. But to their surprise, each account painted the same picture, which showed that Chris was dedicated to his family and not the type of person to simply walk away from his responsibilities. However, with no sign of any activity on his phone, no financial transactions, and no communication with anyone he trusted, the silence surrounding him became even more chilling, and as days passed without any leads, the unanswered questions began to pile up. Was Chris still somewhere in Gwinnett County? Had he attempted to make his way back towards Douglas County where he lived? Or had something far more troubling happened to him in the hours after he was last seen? But just as the community began to grow concerned that the case was turning cold, a new lead would suddenly emerge, and as the investigators prepared themselves to follow up, it soon became clear that this account would hold a vital piece of the puzzle. On Saturday, the 11th of January, exactly 4 days after Chris had last been seen, a witness would come forward with a crucial piece of information that would add a new and unsettling layer to the missing person case. The witness reported seeing Chris on the afternoon of January 7th, appearing disoriented with a noticeable swollen eye. He was carrying a yellow blanket and wearing a maroon hoodie, as well as a black jacket with the word Sixers, which had been given to him by a passerby to help keep him warm. This account, previously unknown to authorities, provided the first direct insight into Chris's state following the panic attack and car crash, confirming that he had been in distress and was physically vulnerable in the hours after he sent his last message. So, in response to this update, investigators immediately followed up on the tip, re-interviewing neighbours and canvassing the area for additional witnesses or surveillance footage. They cross-referenced the timeline of his last known movements, looking at traffic cameras and any other trace that may have indicated where Chris could have gone after being seen in Gwinnett County. However, despite these efforts, no further sightings were confirmed, and his phone remained inactive. Authorities also reported that his family had been approached by someone claiming to have information about Chris, demanding $10,000, which was a shocking development that added another layer of complexity and concern to the case. But these claims would eventually turn out to be false, with the family learning that this was just an extortion attempt by an opportunistic fraudster who was looking to take advantage. So, as days turned into weeks, the authorities increased their efforts, coordinating between multiple law enforcement agencies, with Chris's family also stepping up their efforts by distributing flyers, launching social media campaigns, as well as reaching out to local news outlets in an attempt to keep the story in the public eye, urging anyone with information to step forward. However, even with the witness account shedding light on Chris's condition immediately after his crash, there was still one case detail that continued to gnaw at both the community and the investigating police, as despite numerous searches and witness accounts, there was still no sign of the vehicle that Chris had supposedly crashed that day, leading to speculation that foul play may have been involved. But refusing to give up, Chris's family would continue to search independently, determined to uncover any new information about the whereabouts of their loved one, and just like that, it wouldn't be long before their determination would eventually pay off when they would make another discovery that would blow the case wide open. On Thursday the 16th of January, approximately 9 days after Chris McKoy had last been heard from, the Douglas County Sheriff's Office would make an announcement to the public that would immediately grab the attention of the wider community. Investigators confirmed that Chris's white 2013 Ford Fiesta had been located by his very own family, abandoned near the Norcross Elementary School on Beaver Ruin Road. From what I could gather online, it is unknown if this was the school that his son attended, or if this detail is just a coincidence, but either way, the discovery would immediately intensify the search for Chris. The only information revealed by online reports about the state of the vehicle is that it may have had a flat tyre at the time, which could explain why it took so long to locate. However, there was no mention of any extensive damage to the car, which left the public with unanswered questions about what really happened that day. But regardless of what was released by the authorities, the fact is that this discovery had provided the first tangible piece of evidence since Chris had vanished, giving his loved ones a glimmer of hope, whilst at the same time, a mounting sense of dread about what might have happened in the hours following his disappearance. According to official police reports, the car was found intact, but there were no signs inside the vehicle to indicate where Chris might have gone, with no further clarification from the police on whether he had left his cell phone behind or any other personal belongings. So, in response to this announcement, news of the car's discovery quickly spread throughout the community, drawing attention from local media outlets and prompting an outpouring of concern from those who were following the case. Social media posts urged anyone with information to come forward, while the family continued to plead for answers, desperate to understand how a man known for his reliability and devotion to his son could seemingly vanish into thin air with no explanation. However, despite the wealth of evidence that has been put forward by the family over the last 8 months, to this day, law enforcement are still no closer to finding out the truth, leaving his family in a state of anguish as they continue to wait for closure. Now, unfortunately, as far as the official investigation goes, this is all we know for now. After months of intense searching and the tireless work of detectives, his disappearance remains as baffling today as it was on January the 7th. For his family, the absence of answers has been deeply agonising, yet they continue to speak out online and appeal to the community, holding on to the hope that someone somewhere possesses information that could finally lead to uncovering the truth. However, with more than 8 months having passed since his last confirmed contact, and no concrete evidence indicating his whereabouts, the likelihood of his safe return has only grown more uncertain over time. So, with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. Now, as always, just before we get into the theories themselves, I feel it's important to acknowledge the immense pain and uncertainty that Chris McKoy's family have been forced to endure during this difficult period. So, out of respect for them, I will approach these possibilities with as much sensitivity as possible, and I will only be covering ideas that stem from the statements made by his family and information released by law enforcement. Also, while some theories may appear more likely than others, we must remember that until concrete evidence emerges, they remain nothing more than speculation. But with that being said, one of the most widely considered explanations for what happened to Chris is the possibility that he may have been a victim of foul play. From the very beginning, his family has been adamant that his disappearance was highly out of character. Those closest to him describe Chris as dependable, caring, and someone who would never voluntarily cut off all contact without a word. The sudden silence, especially given his role as a devoted father, was an immediate red flag, and his family have repeatedly expressed their belief that something must have happened to him. This concern is only amplified by the discovery of his abandoned car near Norcross Elementary School, and for investigators, that detail has been crucial, as it confirms that Chris did not return home after the panic attack and car crash, raising troubling questions about where he went and who he may have been with during those critical hours. A key piece of information came from a witness who saw Chris shortly after the crash, claiming that he appeared disoriented, and this sighting strongly suggests that he was vulnerable and potentially at risk in the moments immediately following his last known communication. Adding to the suspicion is the report that Chris's family was later approached by someone demanding $10,000 in exchange for information about his whereabouts, which raises the unsettling possibility that someone may know more than they have disclosed. So, while no suspects have been named and no arrests have been made, the combination of Chris's sudden and uncharacteristic disappearance, alongside the condition in which he was last seen, has led many to consider that foul play could be at the centre of this mystery. But if this is the case, then the question remains, who could be responsible? And where could Chris McKoy be now? Well, an idea that has been discussed by followers of the case discusses the possible involvement of a person who may have encountered Chris after his crash along Beaver Ruin Road. As far as I can tell from my research, there has been no solid confirmation that a car crash even took place, as the only information I could find about the condition of Chris's car was based on a statement made by the family that mentions how one of his tyres was flat. Now, I can see how this may explain why the car was left abandoned, and a flat tyre could certainly have been the result of some kind of collision. After all, there is no mention of anyone else being involved in the crash, so it's possible during his panic attack, Chris could have hit a curb or driven off-road, which could have led to the flat tyre. But as of now, there is no publicly available information to confirm how dangerous this crash was, or if it had even taken place. For all we know, somebody else could have sent that text message to Chris's family, and that flat tyre could have been purposely caused by an unknown suspect. However, a detail that contradicts this possibility is that according to witness accounts, Chris was last seen disoriented, with a swollen eye, carrying a yellow blanket, so on the surface you could argue that this might be the behaviour of a man recovering from a panic attack and a minor car accident. But regardless of whether or not the car crash actually happened, the circumstances that followed have rightfully raised troubling questions. If Chris was wandering alone in a vulnerable state, then who might have come into contact with him, and why has no one publicly clarified what happened next? This silence has led to speculation about whether Chris could have encountered danger at the hands of someone he trusted, or even a stranger who saw an opportunity. One possibility is that he was confronted or coerced into a situation that quickly escalated, resulting in foul play. Another theory is that he may have been lured into a dangerous situation under false pretenses, leaving him vulnerable to any criminal activity in the area. But without any concrete evidence, these possibilities remain purely speculative for now. So, before we draw any conclusions here, if for argument's sake we say that foul play wasn't involved, then what else could explain his disappearance? Well, investigators have also acknowledged the possibility that Chris McKoy may have chosen to disappear voluntarily, as this is an idea that often arises in missing person cases where there is little to no physical evidence. Some might speculate that personal pressures or even a desire to get away from his stressful life could have led him to leave without informing anyone. However, Chris's family has consistently emphasised that this would be completely out of character for him. They have stated on numerous occasions that Chris would never voluntarily cut off all contact, especially for such an extended period of time, and they insist that even if he was struggling, he would not have kept it entirely hidden. This theory is further challenged by the circumstances surrounding his disappearance, as his car was abandoned near Norcross Elementary School, and he was last seen disoriented with a swollen eye, which are details that suggest he was vulnerable and certainly not in a state to make conscious and deliberate decisions about starting a new life. In addition, if Chris had left voluntarily, investigators would likely expect to see some trace of his movements, a phone ping, financial activity, or further sightings from witnesses, yet months have now passed with no confirmed evidence of him anywhere, which makes a voluntary disappearance increasingly difficult to believe. So while this theory cannot be completely ruled out, I must say it seems fairly inconsistent with what is known about Chris's character, and it doesn't seem to line up with the evidence that is available. But after taking all of this into consideration, if Chris didn't leave by choice and he wasn't the victim of foul play, then what else could have happened to him? Well, another theory that is always quietly considered in cases like these is the possibility that Chris McKoy may have simply been the victim of an accident which could have tragically resulted in his unexpected death. In situations where someone disappears without a trace, investigators always consider this as an option, because it is not uncommon that after months of searching, a case can be solved by finding a body in a remote or hard-to-reach location. In fact, there have been other missing person cases that ended this way, with individuals going missing for weeks or months only to be discovered in an area near where they were last seen, often after suffering an accident with no one around to help. For Chris, some have speculated that after his panic attack and car crash, he could have wandered off and suffered an injury, fallen in a wooded area, or otherwise encountered circumstances where he was unable to reach for help. The fact that his car was abandoned near Beaver Ruin Road, combined with the witness account of him disoriented with a swollen eye, makes this a plausible scenario. However, so far in the investigation there has been no evidence to corroborate this theory. No personal items have been discovered, no surveillance footage after the day he disappeared, and no trace of him beyond the witness sighting and his car. So this absence of evidence makes the accidental death theory difficult to confirm, and understandably his family disputes the idea, holding on to hope that he may still be alive. Also, in most cases of accidental death, some sort of clue is usually left behind, like a piece of clothing or an overlooked trail, but in Chris's case, nothing seems to have surfaced, which could mean that he is still out there somewhere, or that his remains were intentionally hidden. But regardless of what the evidence seems to point to, until more concrete information is revealed, we can only continue to speculate on what truly happened after that fateful day in January. So, with this thought in mind, I believe it is crucial that we continue supporting Chris's family by sharing his story and raising awareness, because with the help of the community, there is always hope that the answers they are desperately waiting for will eventually come to light. Anyway, on that note, I think I'll leave this video here, but as always, if you have any other theories of your own which you think may help explain what really happened to Chris McKoy, please leave your ideas in the comments down below and I'll do my best to get back to you. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for updates on these stories. Also, if you would like to learn more about these types of missing person cases, please feel free to check out the playlist on screen now, which covers the many other cases of young black men who have disappeared under similar circumstances in recent years.